Hello, everyone. I'm Italian, but I work for Grimshaw's quite large office in London. And the reason that I show this is that, not to talk about myself, but the fact that by working in a lot of different places around the world, we kind of look to find what we can move, what we learn somewhere that we can take somewhere else. And so we have our ways of looking at things, and we develop this sense of observation. And when we nope. Maybe? I can talk about myself for a while if you want, but come on. Can you press next, please? Right. So when we go anywhere, but especially we came to Tirana in 2012 for a competition for the Boulevard, context is very important. Next. And so we use the skills that we built by being traveling around the world for the last few years to look at a place. And that doesn't substitute you as the people that live here, that know it, that feel it, that have this memory built through families, through stories of change, and through struggle. So that's something that we as designers need you to bring to us. But we have certain skills of looking at things that in a different ways, with a certain detachment that may help us to define new ways to move forward. And of course, the competition we were entering was about the Boulevard, so we concentrated on that, and we called this Boulevard V 1.0, the 1930s Italian things. And then we called the second Boulevard, Boulevard 2.0, and what we were trying to do is look at the Boulevard 3.0, which may come up, which is, in a way, kind of learning from what's happened to determine what's going to happen next, which I think is a common thread to what everybody's been talking about this morning. And the idea of this V 1.0 is that there isn't one boulevard, there is one model that has been iterated 1,000,000 times. So now I guess the boulevard, the Martyrs Boulevard is maybe version 1.58, and the second one is version 1.32, and our one is still version making into one, hopefully quickly and soon. And then obviously we went around looking at what else the city offers, this idea of a place that has to inform us, has to inform our proposals. And ultimately we are architects, so we're not here all the time, so we did walk as much as possible and as independently as possible, chased by dogs and all sorts of other things. And but then we look at things from the sky, and we kind of understand plans and lines and things, and also gives us an idea of what the task that we were facing was, which we'll eventually show, is a very large area of 1.2 kilometer squares of informal planning, and an about 10 kilometer long informally structured river named Tirana River. And when I came here and I asked, okay, how do I get to the Tirana River, which is the name of the city? Nobody could tell me how, or even if there was one. So hopefully, by what we've been doing for the last few years, the Tirana River will come back to Tirana as a meaningful and enjoyable presence. And of course, we kind of had to establish a vision. I really share what Lorenzo said earlier about the time of urban planning changing. And our idea was to establish a vision for a very long period for this area. It will happen. So, but design a system, not a design, not an architectural proposition, but a system that would allow us to pursue this vision and also take into consideration all the changes that that may happen. Can you press next, please? That will intercur, because yes, I'm in London. In London, we plan and we're precise, so they say. But I'm also Italian, so I know that things don't happen the way you hope them to happen. So I'm really keen, and especially with this project and with the research we're doing, to be able to create a resilient system that allows a direction of travel to exist coherently for a long period, so that people can make that their life vision, you know, for 20, 30, 50 years, but also for things to change quickly and to be able to adapt to new economies, to new needs, to a new population, and so forth. And these are the few key principles we instituted: this continuation and learn from the past to move to the future, the continuity of enclosure, which is a very interesting thing in Tirana. There's a lot of fragmentation, but also very defined city grid structure. These are very urbanistic things, but can you go next? The quality of the public realm, which is a place where, you know, people here live, as in all Mediterranean country, very much outside. So it's very interesting, this kind of, the outside space is a continuation of your way of life, but now it's kind of reappropriated. And maybe we do, you know, like Arby was saying, you know, we do to the squares the same thing you guys did to your toilets. I guess that's the brief, if I am correct. Ease of movement, very important. Understanding that people will move in a different way. It's not all about cars. It's about public transport. It's about private, different way of transport, electric cars, electric bicycles, skateboards, and all sorts of stuff. Next, and nature, infrastructure, and eligibility of space. There's incoherent development brings a breakdown into the city structure that I think is quite apparent in Tirana, and it creates interest. It is not a bad thing. It's a very interesting things, but trying to find a possibility for designer to manage this would be quite interesting, and that's what we're trying to do, to kind of create spaces that have a proportion that people understand at the city scale, you know, big stuff, but also as a person walking, there's always this perspective of saying, okay, I'm this big and this wide and this fat, and I have to go down the road, and what does it feel like? Because if we don't understand that, then we can't design a boulevard. Next. And then adaptability, kind of, we already discussed this, you know, is designing a possibility for different building to inhabit the same space, so even the same building to change through time, to adapt to more residential or more commercial startups, having enough Wi-Fi speed and all that kind of stuff. Next. And then key things for us to understand cities, I guess, as urbanists, is understanding densities. Next. And we kind of simplified a lot, but we picked four that we used as tools, as ingredients of our planning system proposal. Next. And there's 0, 0 is the density of the boulevard, 0, 1 is density of the city, eco-compact city, and then there's other typologies that we were looking at. And each one has an identity. These are like really simple sketches. I don't think any of this will ever appear in Tirana, but it's for us to be able to visualize the relationship between the body and the building and the space and the nature and the light. What does it mean, a 70 meters wide road, and how big a building should be next to it? How many trees do you need to make sure that you understand where you are? Next. And then very quickly, because through discussion yesterday, it's become quite apparent that it's a very interesting proposition. So if you go next, there will be the potential of what the river can offer, understanding how it behaves, what the geology is, what's the potential, what's the connectivity between this body of water and the city, and can it become a very, very long water garden that also interacts with some of the things we discussed before about green infrastructure, and how this kind of restoration project that's going on now can turn into a park, can turn into a places for people, and can also help mitigate some of the issues that we see these days. And that's, you know, a 40-year little flick of drawings. Next. And then the way we work is we understand all these things, then we put fixed points that I really don't want to tackle because they're too complex. Next. And we call them constraints. And there's property boundaries, property ownership, pregress information of planning, roads, key things and key policies that within our scope we weren't able to change. So we took them as givens. So let's not talk about that. Let's focus our attention on other things and see how we can interact with them. And ultimately we ended up with these two diagrams and two key strategies. There's a more traditional one, which is generating a fixed vision of the city with meta areas, that kind of top-down version, and a more interesting one, and maybe more British one in a sense, understanding parameters and growth areas and allow development to interact with the person that give permits, in this case the municipality, to see what's needed and how to make it happen. Next. And we have a ginormous matrix of numbers because that's what we need to do our job. And then, so we got to this point, we have the constraints, we have the numbers, we have the targets, where can we be architects in all these numbers and little fixie points? Next. And so we employed some of our research into, sorry, this is what we were trying to achieve. Next. Our research in computational methodology, which is a very big word to say that these days you can type numbers and they draw lines, and you can draw a line and they give you back numbers. That's what computational methodology means. Next. And we translated these fixed points and key simple regulation that the city already had established for a long time into tools, into computational tools. If you click through this, please. So there's a footprint, the area to site plot ratio, and all this kind of stuff, height and densities, and relationship between roads and height of buildings. Next. And then we test them in a very abstract space and say, okay, if we have a road of a certain size, which is the red line, what does it do to the building? If we have a building, what does it do to the road? And can we put them all together and make it play with each other to give us enough space to design and be able to respond to what our clients want now, to what our clients want next week and the week after, in 2 years, and 10 years, and 20 years. So it's like a live machine, which kind of looks like that, but with about 50,000 of these strips. We interface them with what urban planning has to deliver, right? We have to deliver a plan, we have to deliver some rules, we have to deliver some quantum of building, normally at all these scales. But our aspiration was, can we have one place where we can play with all these scales interdependently all at the same time? Because I think that responds to the need of the economic cycle that we have now. We want this happening now. What does it mean in 50 years? We have to know that. Can we do it inside a computer? And so basically we have these key parameters of scales, of green infrastructure and pedestrian infrastructure, or transportation, and that is kind of character of the areas of the city. That's what we mean by the bottom diagram. And our system allows them to interplay and start from any point and see what does that means into the big project. Next. And so we have buildings that exist, public buildings that we need, a general density and hyperdensity, and then we are allowed to design something into this process, to design our design proposal for the city, which is the scale of the boulevard relates to the cities. It will be a 4.5 kilometer long corridor that links 2 parks and 2 lakes, and hopefully deliver a clear European structure to the city of Tirana. But then there's people living, and people don't want to live in big boulevards, I think. You know, people in Tirana live in little courtyards, little streets. So we're trying to mix that in. And that's what happens when you mix these things. The whole plane changes, still deliver the same amount of built areas, which is a big important thing for actually making this happen, because you need the money to stack if you go next. And then if you look at that, we have the ability of controlling the massing of these spaces, and so that gives the architects that will design the building where you're going to live the right tools and the ability to tell us, oh, we want to do this, and we can test it into the much bigger picture on a 50-year plan. Next. And this is a snapshot of what we have done at the end of our work, which, of course, if we started doing it now, will be very different. So if you go next. Oh, I forgot. Well, that's the boring part. So after all that, our system also allows to export a whole big fat number of drawings that the city needs to be able to give planning permits out, which is not a, a small thing. So, you know, there are kind of contextual drawings that allow to define key moves for the initial planning and comply with all the other regulations that exist. Next. And one key thing that we're trying to introduce, and I think is very important, and it's something that, to be honest, has been tried in a lot of places, and there's very different ways of doing, and this kind of ownership pooling. The left-hand side diagram is a kind of classic piece of land into the area. You know, very different size, but very complex ownership pattern. We would like to achieve the second diagram of a coherent, well-structured, ordinated city with the right amount of free land to build land, right heights and stuff. And that means that everybody in that complex diagram has to agree to go with it. And that's the maximum output. If somebody doesn't agree, then there are two different patterns. There's people with enough land to disagree and still achieve something through their own means, kind of create a second, the middle diagram, the third one in line. So while if only one person decides, oh, sorry, I'm not interested, Mr. C is not interested in collaborating with all the others, the result is not that nothing happens. It's just that something can happen, but in a way there's various degrees of efficiency into the delivery of the city. So we try to create a pattern that helps people get together and move forward. So if you could go forward very quickly now, there's a lot of images, and then the 1 minute of the work in progress, please. Next. So this is kind of just visual of what we think Tirana could achieve, of a lot of green spaces, pedestrian paths, interesting public areas, public buildings, small backyards, worldwide marathon, and the ability of people living next to a free area. And lastly, which is the last thing we've been doing, is seeing if our idea of this ability to change things, go next please, very quickly. Next, is, you know, we've been working with municipality for 4 years, so there's been changes, as you know, and we were asked to change the ideas of public squares into an idea of people's garden or the park. And so we used that system and put a lot of zeros. Next, we analyzed what green there is in Tirana. Next, and we took all the green we planned and put it together, and next, and created, found the space to fit it onto the site, next, and created a new version of the master plan that responds to this idea of there is a square as a living room, now we're building everybody's backyard.